Welcome back to Let's Invest with the ASX. In this video, we will be discussing the topic of gearing. Gearing is an investment strategy to gain exposure to an asset with less capital. It involves borrowing a portion of the asset's purchase price. The term exposure varies depending on the asset, but for financial assets like shares, it generally refers to the right to earn income and capital returns. Gearing can be implemented in various ways, with borrowing being a common method, such as borrowing for an investment property. Gearing magnifies gains and losses through leveraging a smaller amount of capital to gain exposure to a larger asset. For example, buying an asset worth $200 with $50 of your own capital and borrowing $150. If the asset's price increases to $250, after repaying the loan, you have a $100 return on your $50 investment, resulting in a 200% gain. Gearing amplifies your returns on the initial capital invested, as seen in this example. Conversely, if the asset's price decreases to $150, after repaying the loan, you will be left with only $0, resulting in a 100% loss on your original investment. Gearing increases the potential for both higher gains and larger losses. Please note that this example is for illustrative purposes only and does not consider interest, taxes, fees, or other factors that may affect the actual outcome of a geared investment. Investors who borrow to gear their investments will have to pay interest on the loan. In Australia, taxpayers who acquire an income-producing asset through borrowing can typically claim a tax deduction for the loan interest. Positive and negative gearing. Positive gearing refers to a situation where the income or dividends earned from the investment exceed the loan interest, resulting in a net positive cash flow. Negative gearing occurs when the income or dividends earned from the investment are lower than the loan interest, resulting in a net negative cash flow. Positive gearing can provide additional income and potentially offset borrowing costs, while negative gearing may involve a cash flow shortfall that is subsidized by the investor. The choice between positive and negative gearing depends on various factors, including the investor's financial goals, tax considerations, and investment strategy. Key considerations for any gearing strategy. Evaluate total returns and the after-tax costs of gearing. The gearing strategy should aim to capture both income and capital growth returns. Dividends or investment income can be used to offset loan interest or reduce borrowing. Determine the appropriate level of gearing based on financial objectives and the ability to recover from potential capital losses during market downturns. Consider the expected investment returns relative to interest rates when deciding on the amount of gearing. Always align investment decisions with personal goals and circumstances. When borrowing to acquire an asset, carefully decide on the amount to borrow and the investment choice. Never borrow beyond one's ability to make loan repayments. The risk of losing more capital. When you engage in gearing, there is an increased risk of losing a larger amount of capital compared to investing without leverage. Increased exposure. Gearing allows you to have more money invested in a particular asset or portfolio. While this can amplify potential gains, it also means that losses will be magnified if the value of the investment declines. Limited flexibility. If you have borrowed to invest and the value of your investment drops significantly, you may face a margin call. This means you will be required to provide additional funds or sell some of your holdings to meet the lender's requirements. Selling into a declining market may not align with your investment goals or market outlook. Risk management. It's crucial to assess your risk tolerance and ability to recover from potential capital losses before engaging in a gearing strategy. Consider the potential after-tax returns of your investment and ensure they are sufficient to cover borrowing costs. Investment decision alignment. Before implementing a gearing strategy, align your investment decisions with your financial goals and circumstances. When considering gearing by borrowing to invest, make sure expected total return exceeds borrowing costs after tax. Understand and accept the risks, including potential capital loss. Have the financial resources to recover from losses. Margin loans enable borrowing of capital to invest in assets such as shares, ETFs, and managed funds. The investment portfolio serves as collateral for the loan, and the borrower retains ownership and control over the investments. The borrower is entitled to all the returns from the investments, but in the event of default, there may be consequences regarding control and ownership. Margin loans have interest-only periodic repayments without a fixed timeline for principal repayment. The flexibility of a margin loan allows for a gearing strategy tailored to individual circumstances and expected capital growth. The investment portfolio can be divided, enabling the sale of a portion to reduce the loan. The application process involves providing financial details and evidence of the ability to meet interest payments. The lender assesses the loan application and provides approval, typically within a few days. Margin lenders often have a minimum loan amount, usually around $20,000. Margin lenders typically offer loan-to-value ratios, LVRs, ranging from 50% to 75%. Blue chip shares often have an LVR of 75%, allowing borrowers to borrow $75 for a $100 investment. Speculative small-cap shares may have a lower LVR, such as 60%. Managed funds with a diversified portfolio of quality shares may have a higher LVR, such as 75%. Each lender maintains a list of acceptable investments and their corresponding LVRs, which may be periodically updated or adjusted. Many investors choose to borrow less than the maximum amount allowed by the lender. For example, acquiring a portfolio of blue-chip shares by borrowing only half of the purchase price would result in a gearing ratio of 50%. The gearing ratio represents the proportion of borrowed funds compared to the investor's own capital invested. The gearing ratio fluctuates as the market value of the investment portfolio changes. If the market value increases, the gearing ratio decreases, and if the market value decreases, the gearing ratio increases. Margin call. A margin call is a demand to reduce the gearing ratio to an acceptable level. It is triggered by a decline in the market value of the portfolio, increasing the gearing ratio. The acceptable level is typically the loan-to-value ratio, LVR, set by the lender. A margin call is triggered when the gearing ratio exceeds the LVR plus a buffer. To address a margin call, the investor must reduce the gearing ratio below the LVR, not just below the LVR plus the buffer. Lenders usually provide a 24-hour window to respond to a margin call. Options to rectify a margin call include selling part of the portfolio, using cash from other accounts, or adding acceptable investments. The appropriate approach depends on the investor's circumstances and market expectations. Proactive monitoring and adjustments are key to avoiding margin calls. Behavioral biases, such as reluctance to realize losses, should be acknowledged when making selling decisions. By being aware of these points and taking appropriate action, investors can effectively manage margin calls and minimize risks. When buying shares via a margin loan facility, the purchase should be linked to the loan. Investors have the freedom to choose any broker, although some margin lenders may have affiliations with specific brokers. Buying and selling shares through a margin loan can be automated or involve a manual process. In a manual process, the broker contacts the margin lender to confirm available credit before executing the trade. Manual processes may incur higher brokerage fees. It is recommended to discuss with the margin lender or broker to determine the most convenient and cost-effective option for buying and selling shares. Double gearing can refer to two different scenarios. The first scenario involves borrowing from a home loan and using that borrowed money as the capital for a margin loan. Excessive gearing is a concern in this scenario, as borrowing too much compared to the total value of assets can be risky. The second scenario involves borrowing to invest in an asset that already employs gearing, such as a managed fund with internal gearing. In this case, the key issue is price volatility. Gearing amplifies the impact of market movements, resulting in higher price volatility for investments with internal gearing. Investments with high price volatility are more likely to experience significant value declines, potentially triggering a margin call. To mitigate risks, investors should avoid excessive gearing without a plan for margin calls, regularly monitor the loan and portfolio to stay within an acceptable range, diversify the portfolio to mitigate the impact of price declines in specific assets, and exercise caution with highly volatile assets that can trigger margin calls. By following these guidelines, investors can mitigate risks and increase the likelihood of successful margin loan investing. Thank you for watching. If you found this information helpful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more informative content. Don't forget to use the flashcards provided to reinforce your understanding. Goodbye and happy investing.